I grew up in a small town, and there was this abandoned factory just behind the playground where I used to play. I'd always been curious about the factory, but it would give me creepy vibes, and I was afraid of it, so I never had guts to explore the place. I'd heard stories about people who had gone in there and never came back. Anyway, one day I was playing soccer with my friends in the playground when I kicked the ball a little too hard and sent it flying over the fence and into the factory. My friends all laughed at me and told me to go get it, since I was the one who kicked it over there. I didn't want to go, but they wouldn't let me be until I did. I fearfully went near the fence and stood there for a moment, afraid of the darkness inside the factory, which was evident from its broken windows. I climbed over the fence and went into the factory. The door of the building was unlocked, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. The factory was dark and dusty, and the only sound was the echo of my footsteps. I could see cobwebs hanging from the ceiling, and old machinery covered in rust. I started to walk through the factory, looking for my ball. I didn't hear anything, but I had this feeling that eyes were watching me from the shadows. I started to get frightened, but I forced myself to keep going. I finally found the ball in a corner of the factory. I was about to pick it up when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around, but I didn't see anything. I heard the noise again, and this time it was closer. I grabbed my soccer ball and started to run, but I tripped and fell. I looked up and saw a figure standing in front of me. There was this weird-looking man with long, scraggly hair and a beard. His eyes were dark and empty, and he was wearing a dirty, torn coat. I screamed and tried to get away, but the man grabbed my arm. He pulled me close, and I could smell his foul breath. He started to laugh. It was the most horrifying sound I'd ever heard. I finally managed to break free from the man's grip and ran out of the factory, ball in hand. I didn't stop running until I was home, safe and sound. I never went back to that factory again, and I never told anyone what happened. I'll never forget the look in that man's eyes, or the sound of his laughter. The next day I went back to the playground to see if my friends were there. They were, and they asked me where I had been. I told them that I'd gone to get my ball and went straight home, but I didn't tell them about the man. We played soccer for a while. While we were playing, I couldn't stop thinking about the factory and the man I'd seen there. After playing for hours, I grabbed my bottle of water and sat on the bench in the playground. The bench was just beside the fence to the factory. I had a continuous feeling that someone was peeking through the darkness of the factory behind those windows, but I ignored the feeling because I didn't want to look back. After a couple of minutes, I couldn't help my curiosity, so I turned around, and there he was. The same crooked figure standing just behind the wall with only his face tilted outside and visible from the window. He had the same creepy smile on his face and was looking right at me. I ran out of the playground and I never went back. I told my father about the incident and he made the police search the factory, but no one was found. The police told my father that the factory closed years ago and has been abandoned ever since, but it was rumored to be haunted. They also said that there had been reports of people seeing strange figures and hearing strange noises coming from the factory. I knew then that I had not imagined what I'd seen, and I'll never forget the day I went to that abandoned factory. When I finished my first year of college, I was eager for a vacation, and I planned a big trip to take. My best friend, John, lived next to me, and there was an old hospital down the road from us. It used to be a mental asylum, but something happened when we were in high school and they shut that asylum down for good. Since then, it's been sitting there rotting away for years. One summer night, John and I were drinking, and we mistakenly entered the parking lot of the mental asylum. We didn't have the slightest idea that it was the parking lot of that abandoned hospital. When we finally realized it, we had already walked so far in. And there it stood, a high-standing, abandoned building. There was a tattered sign outside the door where we stood. It said, "Restricted Area." And that's when our curiosity got the best of us. It was adventure that we craved, probably because we were drunk, too. We were entirely unaware of the danger that stood inside, waiting for us. We had never been in there before, and we didn't know anyone who ever had. We pushed forward and checked the building out. The very first door we walked up to had a rock jammed in between the doorframe, which allowed us to enter. At this point, we realized that this could potentially be a very bad idea if we got caught. We could suffer some consequences. But we were careful, and we tried our best to be as quiet as possible and make it a quick trip. This is where things took a turn, or rather a few turns. As we entered the building, the silence of that building was eating me from the inside. The sound of the door closing behind us echoed like a bomb going off. We then got confirmation that this place was genuinely creepy. We walked slowly, but the floor was covered with broken glass from the windows. Our footsteps were echoing aggressively in the building. We found a patient's room which still had beds inside. We stopped at the doorway to look inside, and the floor looked sketchy. Out of nowhere, from around the corner, we heard a slow and faint whistle. I just stared at John because even a whisper sounded like yelling in this place. We both had our feet planted to the ground because any movement would make us known. We assumed that there must have been a guard or a caretaker of the building. John gestured that we have to leave, as we couldn't just stand there because the whistling wasn't stopping. At that point, we turned toward the opposite side of the corner where the whistling was coming from, and we tiptoed away in perfect silence. Then, the whistling stopped, and we froze. We heard the glass crunching from around the corner, and we started running. Once we got to the door we came in from, we realized we hadn't put the rock back in the doorframe when we entered, and the door was completely stuck shut. We were trying to get the door open as the glass crunching got closer and closer. We were terrified. The noise of the glass stopped right at the other side door, which was closed on our right. We stood there quietly for some time, hoping that someone would open the door from the outside. The doorknob started to turn, and we held each other with fear. The doorknob started to turn from the outside, but then it suddenly stopped. Silence took over, and we turned around to try another door, which we were able to force open. The room seemed to be an operating room, which was completely empty except for a single, perfectly placed and aligned landline phone plugged into the wall, and a stretcher with blood on it. The phone was off the hook and making a dial tone. It was perfectly lined up and centered with the whole room. I'd never seen anything like it. The dial tone was loud and echoing, but there was no power connected to the hospital. So how was it working? I was in shock. We didn't have time to think, so we sprinted towards the exit, only to find the exit doors jammed again. We were trapped there for a moment with the continuous fear of death. Panic surged through us, and we knew that we had to escape this nightmarish place. Summoning all of our strength, we pushed, pulled, and heaved against the door to force it open. It creaked and resisted. But as we heard the footsteps again, we gave the door our best shot to escape before the footsteps got too close to us. Finally, the door fell on the ground with a loud thud, freeing us from the clutches of that deadly, abandoned hospital. We left the place as soon as we could, and never went back. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places and the creepy vibes they give. There's something about them that's just so eerie and mysterious that I love. But my love for abandoned places became the reason for my near-death experience and trauma that I will never forget. I used to pass by an abandoned building on my way home from school that had always been the center of attention for me. The building had been abandoned for years, since a fire burnt it down in 1998. That tormenting fire killed 13 people, including 2 families. The fire was rumored to be caused by a psychopathic woman who wanted to kill everyone in the building. Her body was never recovered in the fire, and she was never found. The building was rumored to be haunted as well. I'd never been inside, but I had always wanted to check it out. One day, when I was walking home from my college, I passed by that same abandoned building. That day, I decided to finally go in and explore what was inside. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The air was stale and dusty. I walked slowly through the building, taking in the sights and smells. The building was in a state of disrepair. The walls were covered in graffiti and the floors were littered with garbage. There was a strange smell in the air, like something was rotting. While I was trying to read some strange symbols drawn on the walls, I heard a subtle sound of someone sobbing. I thought I must be overhearing something, but it continued. So I decided to follow the sound and walk down the hallway. I came to a room that was different from the others. It was dark and quiet, and there was a feeling of sadness in the air. As I looked in the corner, I saw a woman sitting on the floor. She was hunched over, her hands wrapped around her legs, and her head was down. I couldn't see her face, but I could tell that she was crying. I slowly approached her, and suddenly she raised her head and she looked up at me. Her face was half burnt, and her eyes were filled with pain. I gasped, took a step back, and fell. I tried to get up, but I was so startled that I kept falling down. The woman, sobbing, swiftly turned into creepy laughter as if she enjoyed my pain. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I just laid there, frozen in fear. The woman stood up and walked towards me. She was holding a broken bottle in her hand. I could see the blood dripping from the jagged edges. She raised the bottle above her head and she was ready to strike. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But then I heard a noise. It was the sound of someone running. I opened my eyes and I saw a man running towards us. It was my friend Jason. The woman turned her face towards Jason and raised the bottle again, but he was too quick for her. He tackled her and got rid of the bottle. Then he quickly ran towards me. He helped me to get up on my feet. He told me that he was walking behind me on my way home and he saw me going into the abandoned building, so he followed me. Jason took me back home and told me about the woman who lived inside that building. He said that she was the same woman who caused the fire that burnt the building in 1998. Since then, she's been feeding herself with every living thing that enters that building. And that's how she's still alive since the fire. Now, the police and the mental hospital have tried to get her, but she's always escaped them. Some say she's possessed by a demon, and others say she's a psychopath.